Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 24th of March, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Ben Rubin with me in the studio. We're joined today by Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie, with a link from Scotland. And we're also delighted to have Sandi Adams with us on a link as well. So a lot happening, but for today's news, we're going to start off with a little bit of remembrance, which of course is the 5-year anniversary of lockdown. Diane, welcome.
Yes, thanks, Brian. Hello, Ben. Hello, Sandi. I'm really happy to be here today, but it's really unfortunate that we have to commemorate this today. Just so that we know exactly what we're commemorating, the 23rd of March, 2025, yesterday, was the 5th anniversary of Boris Johnson sending us residents of the UK some very important and scary, fearful instructions. Let's play that back again for our viewers, so remember exactly what he said to us.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. Because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households. That is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes. Shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible. One form of exercise a day, for example, a run, walk or cycle, alone or with members of your household. Any medical need to provide care or to help a vulnerable person. And travelling to and from work, but only where this is absolutely necessary and cannot be done from home.
So, just as that reminders, let's hear now, actually, what Mike Robinson and Brian Gerrish had to say just after 1 o'clock on the 23rd of March, 2020.
Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 23rd of March, 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson. Myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us northern exposure from north of the border. Are you 3 feet away from me?
Possibly, maybe.
Yes, we're about as far away from each other as we can get here in the studio. Naturally, we want to follow government advice.
I really like that extra lean that you did over to the side, Brian. That was absolutely hilarious. So as Mike continued through the news, and he said, we have a quote from him here saying that today, 23rd of March 2020, is a special day in the Houses of Parliament because the emergency coronavirus bill is going through. And then he put up the next slide outlining the contents of the coronavirus bill. He went on to say that the last point on that slide, which was supporting and protecting the public to do the right thing and follow public health advice, was the one with, quote, 1984-like language, just again to show us how ahead of the curve UK Column always is when it comes to things. So just to get the exact timeline correct, 23rd of March was when Boris Johnson went on TV and told us we must stay at home. 25th of March was when the Coronavirus Act 2020 received royal assent, and the 26th of March is when lockdown measures legally came into force. So it took a few days to get us all locked up. Just imagine how many people could have died in those 4 days. It's absolutely shocking, isn't it? So sorry, that was a bit of Mike's sarcasm. Honestly, though, thank you so much to Mike Robinson, Brian Gerrish, and the others who were on the UK Column team in 2020, because you helped keep all of us sane. And I hope at that time as a member, we did the same for you. So to go into a little bit more of the media manipulation that was going on, I went onto the Wayback Machine to see what the BBC homepage looked like on the 23rd of March, 2020. And we see, among other things, Canada withdrew from the 2020 Olympics over the virus. McDonald's was going to close restaurants in the UK and Ireland. A football club was selling virtual chips to raise funds. I don't know if there was any fish to go with them, but they had chips. An A&E doctor's plea to stay indoors and isolate, why social distancing and isolation matter, and how to keep up to date with the latest virus information. It probably told everyone to keep watching the BBC when really we all should have been watching UK Column. If we go back in time just a little further, so remember what happens in the months just leading up to these lockdowns. On the 18th of October, 2019, please don't forget the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hosted Event 201 in New York. This exercise, according to the website, illustrated areas where public-private partnerships will be necessary during the response to a severe pandemic in order to diminish large-scale economic and societal consequences. In January 2020, we were receiving images to ramp up the fear that was coming in from China. These two were taken from a photographer from AFP in France and shared on news outlets all over, including NBC News in America. There was a person lying on the ground on their back wearing a mask. Apparently, we're supposed to believe the person dropped dead of COVID, although I don't think anyone falls on their backs when they drop dead. Then we have another image of a man from the same location wearing a mask, casually cycling past the body. Another image of two people in what looked like spacesuits waiting for the director to tell them what to do. It's what it looks like they're doing. Then, as of 19th of March 2020, according to the UK government, so this is 4 days before Boris Johnson told us that we were locking up, it said COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high-consequence infectious disease in the UK. It said they had taken an interim decision in January 2020 to classify COVID as an HCID, and they had determined that several features have now changed. In particular, more information is available about mortality rates, low overall. So they knew the whole time before they locked us up that there weren't very many people dying from whatever was happening. Here's a slide here from Professor Martin Neal, who's a statistician, that he shared in his talk at our Common Knowledge Edinburgh Scottish People's COVID Inquiry Conference last month, where he did some really deep analysis in Scottish care home data. He found there were no excess deaths in 2020 until immediately after the lockdown started on the 23rd of March, and excess deaths continued until the lockdown ended on the 29th of May, indicating that there was nothing to do with this so-called virus that was so-called circulating. His evidence-based conclusions were that, at the end of his talk, based on statistical analysis, actual evidence, no evidence of viral pathogenicity before the behavioral changes were implemented on us, the reattribution of deaths to COVID from other causes, deaths that did occur caused by the medical and public health response were not due to a novel virus. Every single policy not only failed to mitigate death from the so-called virus, but evidently made the situation worse. The COVID event was created primarily by fraudulent PCR testing, changes to coding of deaths, and iatrogenesis, and ultimately there was no pandemic. So all of these inquiries that are happening, including the ones in Scotland and the one in London, are just cover-ups. I'm actually working on an article about this right now, about inquiries being government cover-ups. Here's some other things going on right now in the media where they're still trying to confuse us and scare us and create more propaganda. There's Matt Hancock saying on the Daily Mirror on the 20th of March, saying he'd do it all again. So thanks, Matt Hancock, for that. This continues. There's a newspaper in South Wales that shared over the weekend on Facebook this graphic from the NHS saying you only have until the 31st of March for a walk-in COVID vaccination. So you've just got just about a week now. There's a Newcastle paper called Chronicle Live I was reading over the weekend that published the results of a survey they conducted with readers, which said 98% of readers said that England could have handled the pandemic better. Yeah, okay. 37% of them felt that the country was right to have gone into lockdown. So that's a majority that didn't think that something was handled correctly. And 79% said that the NHS has not recovered from COVID, which is kind of a problem considering the fact that we had to go into lockdown to save the NHS, apparently. But in some small ways, I guess in a bit of hope, there's a little mainstream coverage that's starting to change. I saw this in the Telegraph on the 15th of March, written by Daniel Hannan, who's a former MEP. And just a quote from this, never forget that making Britain into a broke, repressive dystopia was a deliberate choice. Just 5 years ago, our leaders doomed us to a spiral of decline by failing to stand up to lockdown fanatics. We don't like to admit that we destroyed our economy, took away part of our kids' childhoods, permanently aggrandized the state, and indebted ourselves for a generation, all for nothing. Brian.
Diane, thank you very much. I'll just add to that, of course, in that slide where it was talking about a deliberate choice, was it a choice for the wider public? Because the government was using their behavioural insights team, the government was using applied psychology in order to distort the way people thought, in order to make them fearful and anxious, in order to get them to comply. And for me, this is one of the critical things we must never forget, that the government, the MPs, senior civil servants prepared to use pretty malicious applied psychology in order to get us to do what they want. Let's look at that in another context, and let's move on to the subject of Ukraine. And of course, important talks taking place today in Saudi with the Russians, the Americans and the Russians, to talk about possibility of a ceasefire, but still extremely delicate. This was how the BBC News was reporting it. Trump envoy, and they're talking about Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East. He dismisses Starmer plan for Ukraine. Now, I'm just going to pop this little bit of video on screen because this is in the article. Before we get to video, this was another article that was talking about that interaction. And essentially, Witkoff had criticised Starmer, accusing him of being simplistic and unrealistic in his own, in Starmer's own provision for a possible ceasefire. And he also said that he was posing. So, and a poser comes from Witkoff. It doesn't come from the UK column. But this is the backdrop that the BBC used, and I've put it into black and white so that we can get a better sense of what's going on here. But here is the leader, Keir Starmer, in front of British military personnel. Of course, they're looking to him with absolute awe and admiration as he talks about what he wants to do. And what does he want to do? He wants more money, he wants more weapons, he wants more munitions, more drones. And of course, the British government has effectively said it will fight on the Russian front to the last Ukrainian. So it appears that if you vote for New Labour, you're going to get a new Führer as well. And Keir Starmer is the man. Just compare that headline with, of course, what he's been saying about the need for massive cuts to the civil service. So we've got to cut the civil service by 15% at least in order to save money. Where is the money going? It's going to pay for weapons in Ukraine and munitions. And of course, if you go to the gov.uk website, we can see some of the figures here. It's small print, but they're talking about 7.8 billion in military support and 5 billion in what they say is non-military support. And we compare the two of what we've got for the benefit of people in this country and fighting war. Now, the other thing that's happening is, of course, on the world stage, we've got headlines like this. The UK has apparently been handed a leadership role in Ukraine to pull together a defence group of maybe 50 nations. So I just wanted to comment somewhat cynically on that. We can't run the country. The government can't run the military itself. It can't run the NHS. It can't fill in the potholes in the road. But apparently, under New Labour, we're world leader for 50 nations to prosecute a war. And if we stay on the subject of manipulation of people and applied psychology, no better place to go than the BBC again. This was part of their report this morning on what was happening. US-Russia officials holding Ukraine talks in Saudi as Russian drone attacks continue. Now, this is BBC spin because it's basically accusing the Russians of continuing a drone war unnecessarily. And this was the video that I mentioned earlier. If we just let it play, I'm not going to play the sound because you just hear a little bit of gunshot as some up there. We can see some tracer going up into the sky as some form of air defense in Kiev tries to stop the Russian drones coming in. But if you compare this shot with the scenes of absolute carnage in Gaza, for instance, very little is happening here. But the narrative by the BBC is to suggest that it's only the nasty Russians that are using the drones, and they're doing so on populated areas. But if we do look across UK media reports, this one was a very telling one for the Times in the last couple of the days. Key statement, unseen by the world, British equipment, including drones, have played a central role in Ukraine's new offensive, and British personnel have been closely advising the Ukrainian military on a scale matched by no other country. So this is an admission that we have been prosecuting the war. And if we stay on the subject of drones, really encourage people to go to dronewars.net, where a gentleman called Chris Cole has written this really excellent article looking at who is building drones. And it's mixed in with Lord of the Rings. If you look at Anduril here, the entrepreneur Palmer Luckey is very excited because he's got big contracts for his drones, but it's all really a bit of Lord of the Rings. It's nothing to do with slaughtering people.
And he's wearing flip-flops.
And he's wearing flip-flops. And, of course, he's a very happy man. But this is another quote from that article from a company called Helsing, a company set up by 3 AI experts in Berlin. And its website states that it was, quote, founded to put ethics at the core of defense technology development and insist that artificial intelligence will be the key capability to keep liberal democracies from harm. I found that a fascinating statement, and we'll do more on that. But let's have a look at this, because amongst the mainstream media reports, there was talk about cross-party groups being briefed on not only what our government said is to happen in Ukraine, but also on how wonderful the Ukrainian administration is. When I went looking for this information, I could only find a report that had come from north of the border. So I'm going to say here that, unknown to the UK public at large, Ukraine is burying itself into UK politics via secretive cross-party working groups. Now, we haven't got time to take you through all of the minutes, and if you look, this is from February 2024, but essentially our MPs seem to be spending more time in helping prosecute the war in Ukraine than they do sorting out the vaccine-damaged people in UK. And for completeness, I'll just add up the second part of that so that you are able to freeze the screen and you can look at the detail. But these are clearly meetings where the UK public is being told very little indeed. And what happens as a result of this type of cross-party meeting with Ukraine and Ukrainian officials? Well, we get more excited people here, as detailed by this standard report, that the British man running the Ukraine drone factory is calling for UK government funds after MP visit. And this is the reality of what is going on. We've got MPs visiting Ukraine, deciding on policy, never debated in Parliament, and never really discussed in any detail in front of the UK public. So no money for this country, no money for the NHS, for the roads, for the schools, but we have got plenty of money to get the drone production going for weapons and munitions for Ukraine. And if you voted for New Labour, that is what you voted for, and Keir Starmer is going to give us more of the same. Ben, there's more of this stuff going on under the surface, except you're coming in at the angle that this is to do with government and big business.
Indeed it is. And I just want to say that I cannot believe it's been 5 years since COVID. I mean, what a strange time to have lived through. And I think I need to reflect on that over the next few days, not just because of COVID, but because of everything that came with it, because it was the starting gun, really, for, if you remember the term, the Great Reset, the total transformation of the global cultural, political and economic system driven by the World Economic Forum, announced by the then Prince of Wales, now King Charles III. And the agenda for the Great Reset rumbles on in the country. And actually this week it's touching down at the Eden Project down in Cornwall, just down the road from here, as Anthropy comes back for its third year. And what is Anthropy? It is a grand convening, the great and good of the British political and corporate establishment getting together to talk about the hot topics of the day, self-described as a UK Davos or a Glastonbury for good or a national TED Talk. So that's how they've defined themselves. Anthropy is a UK outpost of the World Economic Forum, and they are here to reset the country. And they've changed the term slightly, but it's basically the same thing. They're rebooting the country now. So they've dropped the reset, and we now want to reboot of everything. So arts and culture, democracy itself, our places, nature. How are you going to reboot nature? I don't know. Infrastructure, leadership, the whole thing, the whole of Britain. That's what they're going for, right? And as I say, it kicks off this week. Who's behind it? This gentleman, John O'Brien, OBE. Actually, I think I've just promoted him. He's MBE, actually. So he's former military, real smoothie chops kind of guy, City of London kind of guy, PR person, formerly of Omnicom, importantly. And if it hadn't been for Omnicom, according to John O'Brien, Anthropy wouldn't exist. That's really important because Omnicom, as a founding sponsor of Anthropy, is also a strategic partner of the World Economic Forum, alongside the other founding sponsor, EY, where I used to work as a director many years ago now. And that's what places this sort of slap bang in the middle of this reset agenda. And it's not just backed by them, it's backed by a huge range of other companies and charities and philanthropic organisations, and it's attended by really half the British establishment. So actually, if there's anyone in the UK that gets talked about on the UK column on a regular basis, they're going to be at this. I actually don't have time to go through it. We could sit here all day talking about the people attending this. And I suggest going to have a look at their website and going through the list, seeing what the agenda items are, seeing who's speaking. We'll provide some links for you. But ultimately, it's all about this. Right? So they talk about inspiring a better Britain, where they bring people together. They set an agenda for them to talk about and to build their network. So you come in, select some themes that interest you, you take individual action and then activate your sphere of influence. So there's a lot of discussions and networking and meeting people, and then the people that you've met, you go out into the marketplace, out into society, and you take collective action across the network, and you then talk about that to build profile and awareness over what you've been doing, and then that process begins again, this kind of infinite loop of transformation and change, and that's what's driving the transformation of the country. So this is a very similar to what happens at Davos, exactly what's happening at Anthropy. They've got a process for it, they describe it, and ultimately, what's that delivering? It's delivering this. Huge, unprecedented wealth inequality. So that transformation engine, that infinity loop that we just looked at, is the process through which wealth inequality is being compounded. These numbers we've shown previously, they're from the US, but the same thing's happening here. The same thing is happening absolutely everywhere, right? So it's about wealth inequality. It's about the transformation of the country from an economic and a political perspective, but also really crucially from a demographic perspective as well. And we're going to hear now from Sir Trevor Phillips, OBE, who is going to be speaking at Anthropy this week about the direction of travel that he sees in the country.
That should be with us very shortly. A slight pause.
Yeah. Here are we.
Out.
I've done some back of the envelope calculations today, and what they tell me is that by the middle of this century, half of Britain's population, should be about 80 million people, will be foreign-born, the children of foreign-born parents or the grandchildren of foreign-born grandparents. You don't have to make hysterical great replacement predictions to acknowledge that this leads to a very different Britain. When I started work, the assumption was that there'd be an organic process of assimilation in which minority groups would be relatively small and they'd become pretty much like everybody else. Actually, the truth of the matter is pressure towards cultural fragmentation has actually gone the opposite way. Right now, there are 29 communities of more than 100,000 individuals in this country who can claim minority ethnic status. Now, does that matter? Well, it doesn't matter. 100,000 is a small town. And in the modern world, that is a self-sufficient community that can create its own businesses, create its own media, its own social networks. And one of the important things about these groups today is that unlike when my parents came here in 1950, they don't leave the old country behind.
The Great Replacement. He's quite happy to sit up there at an event and talk about the total replacement of the native population of the country. And in fact, the balkanisation of the country, right, marginalisation of Anglo-Saxon natives by this new preferred class of diverse immigrants that they're bringing in that have protected status, and ultimately who will not integrate. He said very clearly there, we're not going to expect these to integrate. And this is effectively a process of colonisation that we're living through. It's been going on for a long time. We talk about this a lot in the UK column, but it's coming to a crescendo now. It's going to get worse, frankly. And it's at events like this, like Anthropy, via people like Trevor Phillips there and others, that this process is being progressed ultimately. And what's behind it? You know, we've talked about the corporations, we've talked about Anthropy and these different organisations. Well, there's a session running this week that is called The Hidden Hand of Innovation. Right, and what I'm interpreting this at is, should I say philanthropy, the hidden hand of innovation, which basically means wealthy families are working behind the scenes to completely transform the country. Yeah, so this is an agenda being pushed by the rich down into society. This comes from Crispin Truman, OBE, and I'm going to pick out two organisations here for just to quickly look at to understand who's behind this. The first is the RAIN Foundation. So Crispin Truman is director of the RAIN Foundation, and this is run by the Honourable Robert Rain, who's the current scion of the Rain family, very wealthy property developers, net worth of just over £100 million, alongside Jeremy Sanderson, who is the trustee chair. He's a top city lawyer, and also Rabbi Baroness Julia Neuberger, the first female rabbi in the UK. Well done, Baroness. And they are, through this foundation, shaping the future and funding what they call the migration sector. So this essentially is an industrial sector that they're building in order to facilitate mass migration, delivering systems change, as it says at the bottom there, which is ultimately, at least in part, about demographic change. If you look at the imagery on their website, you can see here, essentially on the left, you've got the young, very ethnically diverse bunch of girls on the left, and then on the right, the older generations is the white man on the way out, essentially. I think this is very telling. Like, they're very deliberately showing you what it is that they're doing in the country and what they're trying to deliver as a transformation, right? And so this is rich families, people you've never heard of, ultimately, alongside people, some of whom you have heard of. So this is London Youth. This is another charity just mentioned in that quote, whose patron is His Royal Highness Prince Edward, current Duke of Edinburgh. So this is being driven from the very top levels, from the royal family, and it's amazing to me, really, that someone in the royal family would be demanding change with a fist in the air like some kind of revolutionary. I think these are the wrong people to be driving a change agenda. But this is what's going on at Anthropy, just down the road from here, and I'm sure we'll be reporting on this more over the next couple of weeks.
And I'll just add to that, Ben, and we fully understand that anybody who's caught up in the migrant stream is likely to be hurt as a result of the overall policy that's being brought in. So at the end of the day, who's going to suffer? Everybody, both from the country of origin of the migrants and also in the country of arrival of the migrants. Both those countries are going to suffer as a result of this created movement. Sandi, I think what an excellent point to bring you in. So welcome to today's news.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Tell us a bit about sanctuary cities.
Well, this works very well with what Ben's just been speaking about, because the UK has embraced the cities of sanctuary agenda, and there's many of them that have popped up over the years in all over the UK, as that slide just proved. The US has had the Sanctuary City program for some time, which is a formal policy within a legal framework, but it's not quite the same here in the UK. The UK immigration is solely controlled by the Home Office, so councils don't have the same legal autonomy, if you like, as the United States. Since 2005, we have in the UK, we've had the Cities of Sanctuary programme. It started in Sheffield, and the concept is more nuanced than the US. It's more a community-driven agenda. more communitarian, if you like, if you want to give it a word, using community engagement. So we've had this since 2005, and they popped up all over the UK. And if you look at the UK Cities of Sanctuary website, they even have a charter from 2022 to 2025 for this Cities of Sanctuary. The cities really of Coventry, Sheffield, and the town of Hastings have engaged in quite big PR campaigns welcoming the refugees. I think we've got some slides of those. And the website has clear, detailed plans on how this can be achieved with social change and building a movement. As you can see with that slide, you've got social contact and how they can actually move this infrastructure forward. So they've got very, very detailed plans of how they're going to roll out this program of replacement migration and how we are going to accept it as cities and towns. Last week, Weston-super-Mare Town Council announced plans to become a city of sanctuary, and the residents are just not too happy about this at all. Because on the surface, the City of Sanctuary movement sounds like a noble idea, of course, a gesture of compassion towards these people fleeing war or persecution. But behind the warm words and smiling PR campaigns, unfortunately, the local residents haven't been consulted. And it'll have a damaging impact on communities and our economy and even the integrity of our institutions. City of Sanctuary status is often adopted by local council without any real sort of democratic process. And that's the problem. There's no referendum, no public debate, just a quiet sort of shift. And it is shifty. It's in policy that can dramatically reshape a town's priorities. Housing lists grow, for instance, the NHS waiting times worsen, and schools struggle to cope with sudden increase in non-English speaking pupils. All of this puts extra pressure on the people who've paid into the system. Now, talking about the schools, this is the problem, is that they've now pushing this agenda through our children under the banner of Cities of Sanctuary. We now have schools of sanctuary. Where children are taught one-sided narratives that present all immigration as good and any dissent as morally suspect, if you like. Children are taught that their city must be a safe space, and local charities are increasingly adopting activist roles where questioning mass immigration becomes taboo, and you're deemed racist or right-wing if you question these narratives. So there's an imbalance here. There's, people's views aren't being taken into consideration with all of this. So we have to ask, is this education or is it indoctrination? And I clearly think it's indoctrination. Refugee programs cost money, and a lot of it. Many arrivals are not immediately employable due to language barriers, trauma, or legal restrictions. That means more welfare spending, more demands on public services, and fewer resources for working class families already struggling with the cost of living. And while some may integrate successfully over time, many don't, becoming long-term dependents on a system that was never designed to support this level of influx. And let's face it, as replacement migration, migrants also age as well, and that hasn't been talked about. So, we have to be honest, this rapid demographic change doesn't always lead to vibrant multicultural harmony. In many areas, it leads to social fragmentation. When large numbers of people with different cultural values settle in a short time without general integration, tensions rise. Communities that once shared a common identity now find themselves divided and unsure of who or what they are anymore. The City of Sanctuary movement now fits into a broader trend. I mean, it's a top-down moral agenda being pushed onto communities without any debate and enforced through institutions like schools, councils, and charities. It's shored up by these charities, charitable trusts, the Esme Fairburn Foundation. Is it about kindness or is it about control? And to put things into perspective, let's look at the Institute of Migration documents. If you didn't know there was one, look it up. They're also covered by Black Lives Matter, support them. And the migration plan of 2030 is actually all part of the Institute of Migration. And that is all linked to the 17 Sustainable Goals. So nobody's saying we shouldn't help genuine refugees, but compassion doesn't mean surrendering your town to this ideology. A generous society must also be a stable one where resources are protected and culture is preserved. And decisions are made with the consent of the people who actually live there. And that's what we need to rethink. It's all been forced upon us. And we need to really look at this and realise that it is part of the 2030 agenda, which actually is all linked to the 17 goals. And do we really need this? Yeah.
Sandi, thank you very much for taking us through that, because it is a very hot topic. It can be difficult to talk about in some ways because of the immense vicious pushback from legacy media, the BBC in particular, if you dare talk about these things. But I know that many years ago, I was able to talk to some of the Asian community, migrant community in the Midlands. And what was fascinating was that they also recognised that the levels of migration couldn't continue without destroying the very nature of the country that they'd wanted to come and benefit from. So the idea that it's only white people in UK who've got any concerns about this is utter nonsense. There's huge concern amongst many of the established migrant communities in UK. I'll just add that into the news. We can talk about this a little bit more in UK Column Extra. Now, very important thing, we have just a few tickets left for our UK Column on Location event, Saturday the 5th of April in Cheltenham. Remind people of speakers: Catherine Gunn, Alex Thompson, Patrick Henningson, Raja Mir, and myself. Just 30 or so tickets left. So if you want to come, we'd love to have you there with us. Then please get onto the UK Column website and buy a ticket. It's going to be a wonderful day, and we've plenty of time to mix with the audience and talk to people. But also, we need to announce today that the online tickets are available on the website. Those are £20, £18 if you're actually a member of the UK Column. So if you unfortunately can't attend in person, which we'd really love you to do, but if you can't, you've now got the opportunity of watching that event as an online event. Now, the other thing is that UK Column puts out a lot of information on the website. And Diane, I think you've got a little bit of comment about this, because huge amount of information, I think, sometimes gets missed by our audience because it's an article.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. As the commissioning editor for our written content, I just wanted to take some time, maybe each time I'm on the news, to regularly mention some of the written articles that have been published on the website, because I think they do get overlooked. Just to review what's been published in the past few weeks, for example, we've had a two-part series about replacement migration, as we've just discussed here, by Simon Elmer, an article about farmers' protests maybe not being a good solution from Charles Mallett, an article about how the Isle of Guernsey beat the big bankers by Mark Anderson, constitutional crisis was going on and still is going on in Germany by Jobst, who was the German man who joined us last Monday for the news. An article about Mark Carney, the new Prime Minister of Canada, who's a really major globalist, and a series of articles about sexualization and indoctrination of children in schools. One is about schools in Wales by Martin Edwards, that's available. And there's another one about Northern Ireland by Hugh McCarthy, which brings us to tomorrow's interview, which is going out tomorrow, which was with me, again, as usual, live stream at 1 p.m. at ukcolumn.org. Hugh is a retired head teacher in Northern Ireland, and he discussed with me the situation in the education system in Northern Ireland and his ongoing efforts in trying to stop this sexualization and indoctrination that's being taught in schools in Northern Ireland, across the UK, and worldwide. And I say worldwide because one of the things that he reviewed with me was the written policies of the World Health Organization, which is dictating what the world's children should learn about sex and sexuality at very young ages. So it's quite shocking, but I think if you could please join us tomorrow at 1 o'clock or thereafter and learn what is actually in store for our children. It's quite concerning.
Let's move on, but we're returning to the BBC. And a key point here is if you think that the news coming out of Ukraine is all genuine reports of what's happening in Ukraine, we'd like to remind you of what the BBC actually does with its other hand. One hand is talking to the UK public, as it were. The other hand is doing something completely different. And the first thing to do is to remind people of the work of BBC monitoring. And the key thing about this organisation is that while the BBC sells itself as that lovely Auntie B, looking after fair play, reporting the facts, BBC Monitoring works for and alongside UK's GCHQ, MI6, and the government to spy effectively on foreign governments and their wider society. And why do they do that? They do that so that the British government can understand better how to influence that particular government, so as to protect the UK. That's what the public's told, but really it's to give the UK military and economic advantage. Now, if that's BBC monitoring, we also need to look at BBC Media Action. We've talked about this organisation in relation to Syria, but of course they're embedded in many places, including Eastern Europe and Ukraine in particular. This is their headline page. We can have a look at what they say. They're only there to help promote trusted information and platforms for peaceful debate. They do, of course, call for more weapons to go into Ukraine, but it's all for peaceful debate. And if you have a look at the partners, we haven't got time to go through them all, what you will find in such organisations as the National Democratic Institute and USAID is these organisations only put money into an organisation such as Media Action if they can gain advantage for the United States as a whole. So the BBC involved in some very dirty work. This is more from their own website. So they're talking about one of two Ukrainian media channels. They say we immerse ourselves in local problems, forcing the authorities and society to respond to them. This is very similar to Media Action in Syria, where they were finding people who were challenging the government in order to help provoke change and regime change. And News of Donbass, which is the second channel, due to the challenging situation regarding freedom of speech and access to information in Donbass, we make a lot of effort to provide these people with quality informational alternatives and strengthen their resilience to propaganda. To which I'm going to look at our audience today and say, no, what's going on here is the BBC is creating the right environment for its propaganda to be able to win public opinion in Ukraine and elsewhere. How can we prove this? Well, this is Media Action talking. It says that their decade-long work with public broadcasters in Ukraine has become more urgent in wartime. So the BBC helped to foment the war in Ukraine so that it can drive its political agenda off the back. This is another comment from BBC Media Action. Our Yes, I Am a Woman gender-focused training project with the National Democratic Institute amid fears of a return to traditional gender roles. Note the language, fears that people in another country, Ukraine, can get clear of the war and return to the traditional gender roles. The BBC doesn't want that. Here is another little quote reinforcing this. So BBC Media Action talking about gender under fire in Ukraine. And Sally Gowland, who is the senior research manager for BBC Media Action, cynically uses the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men as the opportunity to research the suffering of Ukrainian women. Ben, I look at you as I researched that some of this is so despicable, so cynical, so dark. It's beyond me how a woman such as Sally Gowland can actually do this. But let's continue. We've got here changing gender roles in conflict in Ukraine, a research study. So if we put a label on this, there's no mistaking what BBC Media Action is doing. They are running amok in Ukraine in order to change traditional gender roles in order to bring people to the roles that the BBC thinks people should have. This is another initiative, Visible, supporting the inclusion of LGBTQI+ communities in Ukraine. And my comment on this is, while brave Ukrainian men are fighting for their country, BBC Media Action cynically uses the war to help reframe Ukrainian society in the BBC's image. But of course, it goes on here. Let's bring this one in. Ukraine is also part of our humanitarian communication support project, through which we've supported Suspilny. That's a long-standing, or was a long-standing, Ukrainian media channel. Their regional operations in the east of the country and within the oblasts, and they're dealing with mentoring, lifeline training, personal protective equipment, hostile environment training, security consultations, and strengthened connections with humanitarian agencies. This is nothing to do with the BBC promoting the truth. This is burying into Ukrainian society to reframe society in the BBC's model. And let's add this one. The BBC Media Action says, we're also beginning work on a new 3-year project funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, focused on countering misinformation in the region, and another project focused on demining and mine awareness as the people of Ukraine learn to cope with the deadly environmental impacts of a grueling conflict. Well, if we want to know where the weapons have come from, let's just have a listen to the BBC.
The BBC has confirmed reports that the Biden administration will soon provide Ukraine with anti-personnel landmines. The explosive devices, which are banned by most countries, will be used to help prevent Russian advances within Ukrainian territory. Officials said Kyiv had committed to not use them in built-up areas.
So this is the heart of it. Where are the weapons coming from? Of course, they're pouring in from Western countries with the encouragement of the BBC. This is just some of the reports about anti-personnel landmines that were being sent over by the US. But just to remind people, this is a report from UK column 14th of August 2023, where we were showing we had the UK Chief of Defence Staff Radakin visiting Ukraine and discussing how to run the war with the Ukrainian commander Zaluzhny. We labelled them the cluster munition twins because, of course, the Western countries were pouring in cluster munitions for Ukraine to use, even though they were banned. And here was Zaluzhny getting very excited at working with his British partners to decide how to run the war. And in the background, of course, the British military was promoting the very same sorts of agendas that BBC Media Action are trying to push on the Ukrainians. So this article talking about trans soldiers and the backlash that that's caused in the military. And then, of course, we had transgender Ukraine military spokespeople who the BBC were promoting. All in all, Ben, I'm going to say that when you look at it, the BBC, malicious in using propaganda to destabilise countries, but to do that in Ukraine with the hundreds of thousands being killed is just appalling. Now, where does that take us? Let me just...
We're off to Heathrow.
We're up to Heathrow here. So this is you, Sandi. Are you muted, Sandi?
Oh, muted?
No, you've come in. That's
Right,
okay.
I'm back. Yeah, as we know, Richard Tice last week, he went on to I think it was YouTube to speak about how net zero policies were actually the cause of what happened in at Heathrow when the fire at the North Hyde electrical substation led to a significant power outage, and it caused the temporary closure of Heathrow and affected over 1,350 flights, which is such a massive. I think the airline industry is really going to suffer over this, and yet again. Obviously, the incident has sparked discussions about the resilience of critical infrastructure and the potential implications of net zero policies on vulnerabilities like this. And we've realised that the North High Grid Supply Point Strategy Development document really does, it focuses on net zero and 2050. So there is something in this that, what obviously Richard Tice was speaking about, and net zero by 2050 this is all part of their development plan within that substation. So, the backup power systems failed due to a transition apparently from diesel generators to biomass. We don't know, but they certainly do have a strategy, for bringing net zero policies within the structure of these substations. And the trouble is that, these substations really were at capacity anyway, and they're suffering because they haven't had the infrastructure. The drive towards net zero is being pushed to achieve the 2030 goals, but insufficient investment is maintaining and upgrading critical infrastructure to ensure resilience and reliability that will potentially cause nationwide power outages. And this is what we could easily be looking at. The UK's national grid, the backbone of our energy supply, was never designed for the radical transformation of net zero demands. Every policy push to electrify heating, transportation and industry adds immense pressure to a system that's already stretched. And coal is being retired, natural gas is being phased out, nuclear is being underfunded and ageing. And at the same time, the state demands that we plug in electric vehicles, heat pumps, countless green tech devices, all without robust infrastructure to actually support them. The problem is simple. You can't double or triple electricity demand while weakening the resources that provide reliable on-demand power. When the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, this all doesn't work, as we know. And the overloaded substations, can't cope with it all. The fire at Heathrow really was just an example that the substation was running above capacity, and an upgrade was planned but not delivered in time. This isn't unique to Heathrow. It's happening across the UK. Thousands of substations are outdated, underfunded, unprepared for the electric load to net zero demands. So, we've just got to look at this in, a measured way, and to handle electrification of transport and heating is a huge ask, for these aging systems that we have. Just about, it's not about infrastructure and neglect, but it's about the entire ideological framework that's driving policy decisions without proper scrutiny, in my opinion. If we continue on this path, it's more than just flights that will be grounded. It could be everything. It could be our future, our freedoms, our economy, everything. So maybe it's a wake-up call, and I think it has to be. And I think there will be an inquiry, and we will get to the bottom of this. But again, I fear that it's these crazy net zero policies that are doing this, and all of this nonsense is not making any sense, and it's destroying our economy.
With you, and emphasises my point that we can't run this basic infrastructure need in the country because of these bizarre globalist policies. But on the other hand, you can prosecute a war to billions of pounds, and that's no problem. It's despicable. Ben, take us more into the network of who is doing these, who's actually promoting these sorts of agendas.
Yes, it's the hidden hand again, isn't it? Or maybe less hidden, because we're sort of dragging them out into the spotlight now. Regular viewers will remember the Connected Women Leaders Network I spoke about a few weeks ago. That was where Project Dandelion was conceived, which is the drive towards 2 billion female activists making every issue a climate issue. And today we're going to talk about Women of the World Festival, which is 15 years old now. It's funded largely by Michael Bloomberg, and it is run by this lady, Jude Kelly, CBE, who is a member of the Connected Women Leaders Network. All of these things are connected. And as I mentioned, they just had their 15th birthday at the Royal Albert Hall. It was a big shebang. And as part of that, they got to go to Buckingham Palace. Yeah. So, and that was facilitated by Queen Camilla, who is the president of Women of the World. Yeah, so these networks are kind of revealing themselves. I only came across Connected Women Leaders a few weeks ago, and actually if you dig into the people in it and what they're up to and the level of access they've got, it's absolutely mind-blowing. Who else was there? So There's Victoria Beckham, right, who doesn't have a name badge because everyone knows who she is, apparently. And a little bit less glam, Siobhan Haviland, who was personally responsible for setting up a political foundation inside the Cabinet Office. I spoke about that back in November. And Siobhan is actually Director General of the British Chamber of Commerce. And just to kind of put some meat on the bones of this, right, this is not like a lunch club. Like, these women have serious power and influence, and they're wielding it. And just one example that I'm going to show you here now is Siobhan Haviland's announcement at the end of last week, where David Lammy attended and spoke at their Driving International Trade Conference 2025, and he accepted Siobhan's offer that all of our ambassadors and high commissioners will become honorary presidents of British Chambers of Commerce in market. So what we're looking at here is this network of women leaders pursuing and implementing a radical transformation of British government, and ultimately what boils down to imperial power. You know, you're thinking about all of our embassies around the world that grew up on the back of the British Empire, and all of that infrastructure is still in place. And, you know, we don't have a lot of the kind of imperial trappings that we used to go back 100 years, certainly, and beyond that. But those networks are still there, and they have now effectively merged with commercial interests, really merged with the City of London. That's what the Chambers of Commerce represents. And interestingly, this is Siobhan Haviland there. This is the Chambers of Commerce dynamic. You've got a Labour Foreign Secretary announcing this. Then in the background, we've also seen Ollie Robbins go back into the Foreign Office, and he's now running our embassies. He's head of His Majesty's Diplomatic Service. So he came out of government. Obviously, this was our former lead Brexit negotiator, the guy that did a particularly poor job of negotiating Brexit. He then left government, spent 3 years, 3 months at Goldman Sachs International, then nearly 2 years at Hackett, which is an MI6 founded corporate advisory firm. He then span out of there. He's gone back into the Foreign Office. And the first thing that he announces pretty much is this integration between the Chambers of Commerce and the British Embassy Network. Amazing. And it's all coming out of this Connected Women Leaders Network and everything around it. Astonishing.
A lot to be discussed there, Ben, which we will get into in forthcoming news, UK column news editions. Diane, let's bring you back in. Many people get to this point and they say, what can we do about this? And I think one of the answers I would say is that any event that brings good people together must be a powerful thing. What have you got?
Completely agree, Brian. I've attended 2 events just in the past few days that I think are informative for they were for me and will be for the viewers as well. It seems to be something that's starting to happen around the country. That this wasn't happening in 2019, and it certainly wasn't in 2020 because we were all locked up. But I think it's really great to see people getting together to help us figure out what's going on in the world, to look for answers, and to just be together once again. So the first one I attended was on Thursday evening. This was a photo of me with Angus Sutar. This was a Common Knowledge Edinburgh event, which, as viewers will know, was chaired by Professor Richard Enos, and I'm on the executive committee. So this was on Thursday evening. Angus is the founder of the Northern School of Permaculture, which is based near Preston in Lancashire, for a talk about permaculture. And basically the basis of his talk was that it all starts with our food. According to his website of the school, the originators of permaculture said that permaculture is truly sustainable, not UN Sustainable Development Goals sustainable, but just sustainable in a real way. And this is all based on the design rules of nature, and permaculture works with nature rather than against it. This could include stopping deforestation, stopping pollution, things that the big food industry system does in its process of creating big food while they make us feel guilty for even existing at individual levels. He talked about the true diversity of living things, not the so-called diversity that we talk about in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusion or equity. But what is actually being pushed on Western culture currently is not the diversity of living things of different species in the world. And he had a lot of interesting sources in his talk, especially for a farmer. It was great to see a farmer that was so aware of things. One was a Guardian article from 2015, which cited research that found that the Earth has lost 1/3 of its arable land in the past 40 years. So I guess now that it's 50 years, there's even more, pointing to damage caused by erosion and pollution, raising concerns about degraded soil. And it showed an example of soil erosion on farmland in Suffolk. So Angus had a few things to say about so-called climate change and net zero. I have a short video here. We can see what he said.
And those seeking investment opportunities, especially in biodiversity and climate initiative. So this is all the land's being valued on what they can get for building, for putting solar panels on it, for building houses on it, for getting government grants to improve the environment, to prevent climate change.
And what he said, I did a short interview with him just to kind of have his talk summarized for me. What he said was on this next slide, as we can see here, that he said that modern agriculture is beating the soil into submission, which is a really important point. Farmers seem to be under attack. This is an attack on our food supply. It's not just about growing food. It's the whole food system that needs reshaping. And it was also great to see that he even talked about his awareness of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, the culling of chickens and vaccinating them, other things that I'm sure Charles Ballot would advocate for as well. I'm hoping that maybe Charles can follow up with Angus sometime, because I'm sure they would have a great conversation. The second one that I went to was Mark Devlin, and UK column viewers will be familiar potentially with Mark Devlin. He launched his new book with us up in Edinburgh. He is if you're not familiar with Mark, he's a UK-based club and radio DJ, has a long history of doing that. He's now a music journalist and author. He says that on his website in 2010, he underwent what he refers to as a conscious awakening, bringing a new awareness of what's really going on in the world. And his special area of interest was how this ties into the mainstream music industry and the way in which A-list artists have been used to manipulate and mind control the masses in line with a much larger agenda. I have just some photos I've put together, if we can show those, of the event. His new book is called No One's Dad's a Plumber. He called it this because, as he wrote on page 1 of his book, rock stars' dads, builders, dockers, plumbers, in rather short supply, I'm afraid. Generals, admirals, and politicians, on the other hand, no problem. His point being that these rock stars are born into elite families, and frequently they are selected and groomed to be rock stars from a very young age. Here's a video I took of Mark during his talk telling us why he chose to release this book this past week in particular.
Wanted to do it at the time of the spring equinox because the controllers of organised society, the sick ones, the dark occultists, often launch their stunts and their psyops around about this time of year. So this is the launch for my new book. It's titled No One's Dad's a Plumber.
So he went on to show this next slide here, called The Season of Sacrifice, regarding blood rituals and dates. And along with it, what he said was, quote, this time of year, the vernal equinox is highly energetically charged, and the occultists know this, which is why they launch so many of their events around about this time. And we've got a list here of some of them that happened throughout the years. There are many others, but there's a heavy concentration of these events around the time of the spring equinox. This was followed by a slightly altered version of Boris Johnson addressing the country, which I showed at the start of the news, reminding us that the 23rd of March was the 5th anniversary of us telling us we were going to be locked up with fraud, treason, and genocide across the front of the podium instead of something like hands, face, space, or whatever propaganda they were using. In his book, he said that a central theme is that the truth is placed in plain sight, which, Brian, I think you've said before sometimes. Many of the names that you would expect to hear came up in this talk, talking about pop and rock stars related to so-called mysterious deaths by drug overdoses, which are apparently frequently found dead in bathtubs, which, if you think about it, that has happened. We seem to think that's a signature of the handlers that control the stars and decide what happens to them. Many names that won't surprise people came up, like Jimmy Savile, Sean Combs, or P. Diddy, or Diddy Daddy, or whatever he's being called now. Michael Jackson, George Michael, Elvis, Amy Winehouse. He talked about how social engineers and behavioral scientists use bands to get things to happen in the world that they want to see happen through applied behavioral psychology. And those who control the music industry make the stars lose their integrity and their soul once they cross a line in their fame and money, and they're no longer able to say no. I also learned that words such as pasta, pizza, hot dog, and chicken are code words for pedophilia, which is where pizza cake came from. I didn't know that. Mark gave a lot of examples of how pedophilia and other evils make their way into popular music, including these lyrics, for example, from a song by Bruce Springsteen, I'm on Fire. Hey, little girl, is your daddy home? Did he go away and leave you all alone? I got a bad desire. Oh, 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 I'm on fire. It was also interesting to learn that a 12-year-old Phil Collins of the band Genesis, I have a photo of that, was present at the famous Hard Day's Night concert by the Beatles in 1964 that made them so popular in America. He was a paid actor in the audience. And the question was asked, why was Jeffrey Epstein at the Eurovision event in 1985? I've got a photo of that as well. There he is. Jeffrey Epstein, 1985. The album cover for the album Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin has little naked girls on it. So there are plenty more examples from the talk and much more in the book. So I would highly recommend checking this book out. I've got a copy, signed copy, and I can't wait to start reading it because it's really fascinating, but very disturbing.
Thank you very much. Some really serious stuff there, but people coming together and teaching each other what's happening is very important. And when those people go and talk to other individuals, wherever they may be, perhaps the Tesco checkout queue, information starts to spread. These are little seeds of knowledge which then begin to spread amongst the wider population. So there is a lot we can do. We better finish there. I'm going to say thank you to you all. Ben, Sandi, Diane, for joining me today. A lot of information in today's news. Please, for the audience, if you can share it and spread the word, spread the information from the UK column, we'd be very pleased. And don't forget those remaining few tickets for our UK column live event. It will be great to see you there. We must end now. Thank you very much for joining us, wherever you are in the world. We will be back at the same time on Wednesday. If you're a UK column member, stay with us for UK column extra in a few minutes. Bye-bye.